Inside a silent mansion, a shy maid served a man everyone feared, a mafia boss with no heart, no mercy, and no trust. But one day, when Danger walked through that door, he said just 3 words that changed everything. "Who touched you?" From that moment, she wasn't just a maid. She became the only light in his dark world. Stay till the end, because what happens next will melt your heart and remind you, even the coldest souls can learn to love. The mansion stood like a silent fortress on the edge of the city, its tall iron gates closing out the noise of the world. Every corner of it glowed with quiet wealth, polished marble floors, golden chandeliers, and portraits of men whose eyes seemed to follow anyone who walked by. Inside, the air smelled of pine wood, fresh roses, and secrets too heavy to speak. And among all that luxury moved one gentle soul, Sarah, the maid who spoke softly and smiled rarely. She was 27, graceful but shy, her blue eyes always lowered when people passed. Her hands, though small and delicate, carried the weight of every chore, the dusting, the washing, the endless cleaning that kept the mansion shining like glass. She never complained. She never slowed down. Her heart beat quietly inside her chest like a bird afraid to fly too high. Every morning she woke before the sunrise. She would walk through the empty halls barefoot, the silence almost holy, her reflection following her in the polished floors. She arranged the roses in the vases, white, pink, and red, because the boss liked them fresh every morning. She would brew the coffee exactly how he wanted, dark, strong, no sugar, just like his life. Her employer, Johnson, was a name that made even the bravest men lower their eyes. At 36, he had built an empire in the shadows. His power was feared, his silence more dangerous than words. They said he could end a man's future with a single look. They said he never smiled, never loved, never forgave. To most, he was a legend dressed in a black suit. But to Sarah, he was something else, a mystery that made her heart beat faster without reason. She had seen him only a few times up close. Tall, sharp-featured, with a voice deep enough to silence a room. Every step he took carried authority. Yet his eyes, those cold, gray eyes, sometimes looked tired, as if haunted by something he couldn't forget. Sarah often wondered what kind of pain could live behind such strength. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the moonlight painted silver lines across the marble, she would see him standing by the window in his office. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared into the darkness beyond the glass, a man surrounded by everything but belonging to nothing. And in those quiet moments, Sarah's heart softened. She saw not the mafia boss everyone feared, but a lonely man drowning in silence. Sometimes she wished she could speak to him. Just once. Ask him if he ever felt lonely in that big house full of power and emptiness. But she was only a maid. And in his world, maids were invisible. Still, fate had a strange way of making the invisible seen. Because one evening, as the sun fell behind the mansion and shadows crept across the hallways, something shattered that peaceful rhythm. It was small at first, just a sound, just a whisper of movement in the corridor. But it would change everything. The calm of the mansion would never return after that moment. Sarah didn't know it yet. But the man behind the mask, the feared, untouchable boss, was about to see her in a way no one ever had. And from that second on, nothing between them would ever be the same. What happened in that hallway changed everything. The night was so quiet that even the ticking of the hallway clock sounded like a heartbeat. Sarah moved slowly through the long corridor, holding a feather duster in her trembling hand. Every step she took echoed softly against the marble floor. The house, usually alive with guards and murmurs during the day, now felt like a sleeping giant, peaceful, but dangerous if disturbed. She had finished cleaning most of the rooms, but one, the study, remained. She hesitated outside the door, clutching the handle of her cleaning cart. The air felt heavy, as if something unseen was waiting beyond the silence. Then, creak. A door opened behind her. The sudden sound sliced through the quiet like a blade. Before she could turn, a rough hand clamped around her wrist. Her breath hitched. She froze. The man in the black suit smelled of whiskey and smoke. His grip was tight, cruel. "Hey!" he slurred, his voice low and threatening. "Why so scared, sweetheart?" Sarah tried to pull her hand away.
Please, let go,
she whispered, her voice trembling. He laughed darkly, leaning closer. No one says no to me in this house. His fingers dug into her skin, leaving faint red marks. Her heart pounded like thunder inside her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't scream. She couldn't. She was too afraid, too small against the weight of that moment. Then suddenly, everything stopped. A voice, cold and deep, broke through the air like a gunshot.
Who touched you?
The man froze instantly. Sarah turned her head slowly toward the end of the hall. There, stepping out of the shadows, stood Johnson. His face was carved in stone, his gray eyes glowing with fury that could burn the world. Every inch of his tall figure radiated danger. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight. He took a step forward, and the hallway seemed to shrink around him. The man's voice cracked. Boss, I didn't mean... Did I ask what you meant? Johnson's tone was sharp, deadly calm. He looked at Sarah's wrist, saw the marks, the fear in her eyes. That was enough. Get out, he said, his voice a low growl that shook the air.
Before I forget what mercy means.
The man stumbled back, mumbling apologies, his face pale as death. Then he ran so fast the sound of his shoes faded before the echo of Johnson's voice did. The hall went quiet again. Only Sarah's breathing filled the space, soft, uneven, trembling. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself, her pulse still racing. Johnson turned toward her, his expression still fierce, but his eyes softened. Did he hurt you? He asked, his voice low, almost gentle now. Sarah shook her head quickly. I'm fine, sir. He didn't mean... Johnson's brow furrowed, his tone darkening again. Never say that. When someone hurts you, it's never a mistake. Sarah looked up, startled by the emotion in his voice. For a moment their eyes met, his full of anger and protectiveness, hers filled with confusion and fear. She didn't understand why this powerful man, feared by everyone, looked at her as if her pain mattered more than anything. He turned away abruptly, running a hand through his hair, trying to calm himself. Go to your room, Sarah, he said quietly. And if anyone ever comes near you again without my permission, tell me first. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. She only nodded and stepped back slowly, her heart still fluttering in her chest. When she reached the end of the hall, she turned once more. Johnson was still standing there, motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if battling something deep inside himself. Something he couldn't control. Something that had just awakened for the first time in years. And as Sarah closed the door to her small room, she pressed her hand to her chest. Her wrist still hurt, but her heart hurt even more, because she didn't know why his anger had shaken her so deeply. It wasn't just fear she felt anymore. It was something else, something warm and confusing. And far down the hall, Johnson whispered to himself, "Why did it matter so much when it was her?" Johnson's anger turned into something deeper that even he didn't understand. Johnson stood in the middle of his grand office, the air thick with tension. The crystal lamp above flickered softly, casting golden light across his sharp features. His hand was trembling, a rare, dangerous sign for a man who ruled with complete control. He stared at his palm as if it had betrayed him. Why was it shaking? Why did his chest ache at the thought of that girl's fear? He had faced enemies, betrayals, gunfire, and loss, but never this feeling. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pity. It was something raw, something human, something he had buried long ago. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cut through the silence like thunder. Sarah, standing a few steps away, lowered her eyes. Her hands clutched the edge of her apron. She could feel his rage, but beneath it, she sensed pain too. "I didn't want to cause trouble, sir," she whispered. Her voice trembled like a fragile note of music about to break. Those words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Didn't want to cause trouble? She had been hurt, scared. And yet her first thought was to protect him from more problems. Johnson clenched his jaw. No one had ever shown him kindness that pure, that undeserved. He turned away, pacing slowly across the room, each step echoing like a heartbeat. He stopped near the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass, cold, haunted, broken. For years he had built walls so high that no one could reach the man beneath. But this one quiet maid had somehow found the cracks. He inhaled deeply, then spoke in a tone that made the air itself still. "From now on," he said, turning toward her, "no one touches you." Sarah's head lifted slightly, her lips parted in surprise. "You'll work near me, always. Do you understand?" She blinked, unsure what to say. Work near him? The man everyone feared? The man whose name was enough to make hearts stop? Her pulse quickened, but it wasn't just fear anymore. There was something else, something that made her cheeks warm and her breath short. Yes, sir," she finally whispered. Johnson stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, as if even his nearness might scare her. He stopped just a few feet away. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, locked onto hers. They weren't cold anymore. They were alive with something wild and restless. "You shouldn't have had to face that," he said softly. "Not in my house." His tone carried regret, a sound she never thought could exist in his voice. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, to tell him it was all right, but the words wouldn't come. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside the window moved on, cars, lights, life, but inside that room, time stood still. It was just a man who didn't know how to feel and a woman who didn't know what she had awakened. Sarah looked up carefully. "Why are you being so kind to me, sir?" Johnson's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, not yet, but the ghost of one. "Because you remind me," he said slowly, "that I still have a heart." Her breath caught in her throat. The words were quiet, but they felt like thunder in her chest. For a moment, she saw past his title, past his power. She saw the man behind it all. And what she saw wasn't a monster. It was someone lonely, aching to be seen. When he turned away again, the muscles in his shoulders tightened as if holding back emotions he couldn't show. Sarah watched him in silence, her own heart racing. She wasn't sure if she was trembling because she feared him, or because she was drawn to him. That night, when she returned to her small room, she couldn't sleep. His words replayed in her mind again and again. "You'll work near me, always." There was something final in his tone, something protective and possessive at once. And in another part of the mansion, Johnson poured himself a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. He stared at the wall, his hand still shaking. The image of her frightened eyes wouldn't leave him. He whispered to himself, almost angrily, "Why does it matter so much, Ate, when it's her?" The storm in his eyes had begun. And even he didn't know if he wanted it to end. The days slipped quietly into weeks, each one weaving a strange rhythm between fear and closeness. Sarah's footsteps, once echoing through lonely hallways, now often led her into Johnson's office, the room no one dared to enter without his command. At first, she was terrified to even step inside. The walls there felt heavy, soaked with power and secrets. Yet every morning she entered with a soft heart and a careful smile, carrying his coffee, black, strong, untouched by sugar, just like the man himself. Johnson would sit behind his enormous mahogany desk, eyes fixed on papers, voice low and controlled. He never said more than necessary, but slowly she began to notice the details others overlooked. The way his fingers tapped the desk when he was deep in thought. The way he paused for half a second when she placed the cup near him, as if he waited for her hand to move away before reaching out. She learned his silence, and somehow in that silence she found his language. He never smiled, at least not the way normal people did. But one day, as Sarah dusted the bookshelf near the window, she dropped a pen that rolled across the floor. She bent down quickly to pick it up and let out a tiny, embarrassed laugh. It was soft and innocent, a sound so rare in his world that it startled him. When she looked up, she found him watching her. His eyes weren't sharp or cold. They were different. They held warmth, curiosity, and something like peace, just for a second. Then he looked away, as if afraid to be seen feeling anything at all. Sarah's days in the office grew longer. She organized his files, arranged his meetings, and listened when he dictated notes in his deep, steady voice. Every so often, she would catch a glimpse of him staring out the window, hands folded, lost in memories that belonged to no one else. He looked like a man haunted by his own reflection. One afternoon, the light from the window fell across his wrist, and something caught her attention. A scar, long, thin, and faded, but impossible to ignore. Without thinking, she stepped closer.
Mr. Johnson, how did you get this?
She asked quietly. He froze. The question seemed to cut through him like a blade. For a moment, he didn't answer. His gaze dropped to the scar, then to her. There was something vulnerable in his eyes, something he usually kept buried deep. Some scars, he said at last, his voice low and rough, come from trusting the wrong people. Sarah's chest tightened. She didn't know why those words hurt her so much. She wanted to ask more. Who betrayed him? What pain he carried? But his tone told her not to. So instead, she said gently, "Then you must have trusted with your heart, not your mind." Her words hung in the air like a whisper that refused to fade. Johnson turned to her slowly, eyes unreadable. No one had ever spoken to him like that, without fear, without motive, without judgment. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't even sure what he felt. For years he had hidden behind control and reputation, behind money and guns and silence. But here she was, this gentle maid with trembling hands, looking straight into the soul he thought he no longer had. Their eyes met and held. It wasn't lust. It wasn't pity. It was something quieter, deeper, a recognition between two broken hearts. The world outside disappeared. No sound, no movement, just breath and heartbeat. For the first time, Johnson didn't feel like a boss or a monster. He felt like a man, seen, not feared. He looked away, breaking the fragile moment. "Get some rest, Sarah," he murmured, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. "Yes, sir," she replied, but her voice trembled and her gaze lingered on him for just a moment longer. As she turned to leave, Johnson's eyes followed her, though he didn't mean them to. The door closed quietly behind her. He sat there in the fading sunlight, tracing the old scar with his thumb. It had always been a mark of betrayal, but tonight it reminded him of something else. Of how even pain, when seen through the right eyes, could feel almost human again. And though neither of them spoke it, both could feel it. Something invisible, delicate, and dangerous had begun between them. Something that neither the past nor the shadows could easily destroy. The mansion was silent, wrapped in a stillness that seemed sacred. Even the chandeliers, hung like frozen stars, glimmered faintly as if afraid to disturb the peace. Sarah walked softly through the corridor, her hands clutching the neatly stacked papers she had spent hours organizing. Every night she worked later than the others, because near him she felt safe. Or maybe she didn't want to leave that quiet world he lived in. When she opened the door to his office, she found the room bathed in soft golden light. The smell of pine and old books hung in the air. Johnson sat behind his heavy oak desk. But tonight, the mighty Mafia boss was not the man of legend. His head rested on folded arms, his dark hair falling over his face, the weight of years pressing down on him. For the first time, he looked human. Sarah hesitated, her breath shallow. She stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. On the table beside his hand lay an old, worn photograph. A young boy with hopeful eyes, standing beside a woman who had the same blue eyes as him. Sarah's heart ached. His mother. She wondered what had happened to that boy, what kind of pain had turned him into the man the city feared. She reached out and gently placed the blanket she carried over his shoulders. Her fingers trembled as she tucked it lightly under his arm. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the rise and fall of his breathing. That powerful man, who made grown men kneel, looked so peaceful, so innocent when he slept. She turned to leave quietly, but then a deep, husky whisper cut through the silence. "Don't go." Sarah froze in place. Her heart thudded violently in her chest. She turned and their eyes met, his heavy with exhaustion yet filled with something deeper. Pain. Loneliness. A plea he didn't know how to say aloud. "I didn't mean to wake you, sir," she said softly. "I was just—" He interrupted gently. "You didn't wake me. I've been pretending to sleep." Her breath caught. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes dark and distant. "I haven't slept peacefully in years," he murmured. "Until now." Sarah didn't know what to say. Her lips parted, but no words came. Johnson leaned back, looking at her as though she were the first ray of light to touch his shadowed world. Every night it's noise, anger, memories I can't escape. But when you walk in, everything quiets." Her chest tightened, her eyes glistening. She had never heard such raw honesty from him. The man everyone feared now spoke like someone who had been alone for too long. "I'm just your maid, sir," she whispered, almost apologetically. He smiled faintly, a rare, fleeting curve of his lips. "You're the only person who sees me as more than that." Her heart fluttered painfully, her pulse racing as silence filled the room again. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, and somewhere in the distance, the world continued spinning. But in that small office, time stopped. Sarah lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "Then I'll stay a little longer." He said nothing, just watched her as she sat quietly in the chair across from him. The ticking clock filled the room, echoing like a heartbeat. Neither spoke again, yet their hearts did. And though nothing was confessed in words, something had changed forever that night. But the heart never stays hidden for long, especially when danger lurks nearby. The next morning, someone in the mansion would see what they weren't supposed to, and everything would start to unravel. Morning sunlight touched the mansion like a quiet promise, glinting off the marble floors Sarah had just polished. Everything was calm. The air smelled faintly of roses and fresh coffee. Sarah hummed softly as she carried a tray of tea toward Johnson's office, the same way she did every morning now. But today, something felt different. There was tension in the air, an energy that made her heartbeat quicken without knowing why. As she reached the long corridor leading to the front gates, she heard raised voices, deep, cold, dangerous. She froze, her hands tightening around the tray. Then she saw him, Johnson, standing before a man in a gray suit, his jaw clenched, his eyes sharp as glass. The man wore a mocking smile, too confident for someone facing the city's most feared mafia boss. "Daniel Cross!" Johnson's voice was like thunder held back by chains. Sarah felt the chill in the name. Even the guards watching nearby stepped back. Daniel's grin widened. "You remember me then? I was starting to think the great Johnson forgets old friends." "Friends don't stab each other in the back," Johnson replied, his voice low but filled with quiet fury. Sarah stepped closer carefully, clutching the tray. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the danger, thick as smoke. Daniel's gaze slid toward her, slow and invasive. His smirk deepened. "So, this is your new weakness?" he sneered. The teacup rattled on the tray. Sarah's stomach twisted. Johnson moved before anyone could blink. He grabbed Daniel by the collar and slammed him against the gate. The sound echoed across the courtyard. "One more word," Johnson growled, voice shaking with rage, "and you'll leave this place crawling." The guards looked away. No one dared to breathe. Daniel's eyes widened for a moment. He hadn't expected such fury. Then he laughed coldly. "I see." The mighty Johnson finally found something to protect. Johnson's grip tightened. "Get out," he said, his voice trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, more dangerous. Daniel straightened his jacket, still smirking. "Careful, old friend. Love can make even the strongest man weak." Then he walked away, leaving silence behind. Sarah stood frozen at the entrance, unable to move. Her heart was pounding, not from fear of Daniel, but from the realization that had just struck her. He wasn't defending a maid. He was defending her. Johnson turned, eyes still burning, but when they met hers, something softened. His voice was quiet now. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly, though her throat felt dry. "Yes, sir, but you didn't have to—" "I did," he interrupted, "because no one speaks to you that way, ever." The words lingered in the air like a secret confession. Sarah lowered her gaze, cheeks warm, heart trembling with emotion she couldn't name. The man she thought was heartless had just risked everything, for her. As he walked past her into the mansion, she caught the faintest hint of his scent, cedar and danger, and knew something inside her had changed forever. Because now, no matter how much she denied it, she wasn't just his maid anymore. She was someone he was willing to fight for. The night was calm, but inside the mansion, Sarah's heart was in chaos. The memory of what had happened at the gates kept replaying in her mind. Daniel's cruel smile, Johnson's rage, the danger that had nearly touched them both. She sat on the edge of her small bed, staring at the old suitcase lying open beside her. Her hands trembled as she folded her plain clothes one by one. Every sound in the mansion, the ticking clock, the whisper of the night wind, felt like a goodbye. She didn't want to leave, but she knew the kind of men Johnson faced. The enemies, the danger, the constant shadow of revenge. If she stayed, she would be his weakness. The very thing they could use to destroy him. Her throat tightened as she zipped the bag shut. "It's better this way," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. The hallway outside her door was dark, the marble floor gleaming faintly under the moonlight. She carried her bag, each step echoing like a painful heartbeat. When she reached the front door, her hand hovered over the handle. Her chest ached, her eyes burned. Just one step, and I'll be free, she told herself. But before she could turn the knob, a deep voice came from behind her. "Where do you think you're going?" She froze. The voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made her heart stop. Slowly, she turned around. Johnson stood at the end of the corridor, dressed in a dark shirt, his sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. The faint golden light from the chandelier touched his face, making his eyes gleam like steel. Sarah's voice broke. "I can't stay here anymore." He took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Why not?" Her fingers clutched the handle of her bag tightly. "Because of me, you're in danger. Because of me, people are talking. I don't want to be your weakness." Johnson's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then he took another step forward, slow, deliberate, like a man approaching something fragile he couldn't afford to lose. "Sarah," he said softly, his tone almost pleading, "you're not my weakness." She looked up, eyes glistening. "Then what am I?" He stopped right in front of her. His breath was warm against her skin. "You're the only reason I still fight," he said quietly. The world seemed to stop moving. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and the bag slipped from her trembling hands, landing softly on the marble floor. "You don't understand," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day, I wake up surrounded by lies, by violence, by people who'd rather see me bleed than breathe. But when you're here—" He hesitated, searching for words. "For the first time, I remember what it feels like to be human." Sarah's lips parted, her heart breaking for him. She could see it now, the truth hidden behind his coldness. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd forgotten what love felt like, and somehow she had reminded him. Her tears slipped down silently. She whispered, "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Johnson reached out slowly, brushing away the tear that had fallen down her cheek. "Then stay," he said softly. "Please." Her breath hitched at the word please. It wasn't a command. It was a plea from a man who had everything, except peace. The silence that followed was deep and trembling. Then Sarah nodded faintly, her voice breaking. "I'll stay." And for the first time in years, Johnson's lips curved into something almost like a smile, small, fragile, but real. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness now felt alive again, because one woman had dared to stay when everyone else had walked away. But love inside a world of danger never stays untouched. The next evening, a mysterious envelope would arrive at the mansion, and inside it was a single photo of Sarah, with a warning that would change everything. The evening settled softly over the mansion, painting the rooms in shades of gold and shadow. Outside, the sun melted into the horizon, and the air smelled faintly of pine and fresh bread. Sarah stood in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, flour dusting her hands as she shaped small loaves on the counter. It had become her comfort, baking late into the evening when her heart felt too full to rest. Every corner of that kitchen carried memories of quiet glances, brief smiles, and the warmth that had slowly begun to bloom between them. She hummed a faint tune, unaware of the footsteps approaching behind her. The door creaked softly and Johnson entered. He rarely came to the kitchen, ever. It was her world, her sanctuary. But tonight, his expression was different. There was no trace of command in his eyes, no edge of power. He looked uncertain, human. "Sarah," he said quietly. his deep voice echoing softly against the tiled walls. She froze, startled, and turned toward him. "Yes, sir?" He walked closer, his gaze never leaving her face. The flickering light from the stove danced across his sharp features, softening them in ways she'd never seen before. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at her, the woman who had unknowingly become the calm in his storm. Then slowly he lifted a hand. His fingers brushed against her cheek, light as a whisper. It wasn't a touch of power or possession. It was something far rarer. Protection, care, a silent promise. Sarah's breath caught, her pulse raced. The warmth of his hand against her skin sent a shiver down her spine. "Johnson," she whispered, unsure whether to step back or closer. His voice was low but steady, carrying the weight of unspoken vows. "No one will ever hurt you again," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the strength of an oath, as if carved into his very soul. She could hear the sincerity in his tone, the ache of a man who had seen too much pain and was now desperate to shield what little good remained in his world. Her eyes glistened, the world blurring around her. She had never been touched with such gentleness, never been spoken to with such quiet devotion. "I trust you, Mr. Johnson," she whispered. The words left her trembling, not from fear, but from the fragile beauty of truth. He looked at her for a long moment, his thumb brushing away the tear that had dared to fall. Then, softly, he said, "Then call me just Johnson, please." It was the first time his voice ever trembled, not from anger, not from control, but from emotion he could no longer hide. Sarah's heart thudded painfully, the sound loud in her chest. That single word, please, felt like the world shifting beneath her feet. She smiled through her tears, whispering, "All right, Johnson." And the way she said his name, gentle, unsure, yet full of warmth, made something inside him break open. For a moment, they just stood there, her hand still resting near his chest, his gaze fixed on hers. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was soft, electric, alive. A silence that said everything words never could. Then Johnson stepped back slowly, his expression unreadable but his eyes still glowing with something deep and unguarded. He cleared his throat, his composure returning, though his heart was still racing. "Don't stay up too late," he murmured, turning toward the door. But before he left, he looked back once more, and this time there was a faint, rare smile on his lips. It was the kind of smile that said, "Thank you for staying. Thank you for believing." And when the door closed behind him, Sarah placed a hand on her cheek, where his fingers had touched moments ago. The warmth was still there, lingering like a secret. That single touch had changed everything. Sarah walked through the market with a small basket in her hand, the sun kind and ordinary over the city. She bought fresh bread, a bundle of herbs, and 2 bright apples, simple things that made her day feel gentle. The market felt safe, full of familiar faces and friendly sellers who always greeted her with warm smiles. She hummed without thinking, the tune small and bright, a secret comfort she kept for herself. She did not notice the shadows that followed at a distance, 2 men in plain coats who moved like ghosts between the stalls. They watched her with hard eyes, lips tight, planning like predators. Sarah paid the baker with careful hands and tucked the bread into her basket. She had no reason to hurry. She thought only of returning to the mansion where the halls smelled of pine and safety. When she turned down the narrow alley that led back to the main street, the world changed. The market noise vanished. The alley felt narrower, colder, the air thinner. 2 men stepped out from behind a stack of crates and blocked her path. Her breath caught. She put the basket down slowly, every movement careful. "Your boss cost us millions," one of them hissed, his voice low and cruel. The words were like ice sliding across her skin. "Tell him he'll pay. With you." Sarah's hands trembled. She tried to step back, but the wall pressed against her shoulders. She thought of Johnson, of his promise, but fear clouded her mind. The taller man moved closer, his shadow swallowing the light. "You're small, you'll be easy to break." Their eyes were ugly, hungry, and the alley smelled of smoke and old anger. Sarah's fingers dug into the basket until the wood bit her palms. She wanted to scream, but her voice would not obey. Then, like thunder on a clear day, the sound of engines tore through the silence. Black cars skidded to a stop at the end of the alley. Doors slammed. Footsteps hit the ground with hard, fast rhythm. Johnson stepped out first, tall, dark, a figure carved from iron and fire. Gun in hand, his face was a mask of fury so cold it could freeze blood. Time narrowed to a razor's edge. The men around Sarah went still as statues. Johnson's voice cut through the alley like a blade. "Touch her, and I'll burn your world!" He did not shout. He did not need to. The words carried a promise that would destroy anyone who dared test it. The men who had cornered her swallowed hard, the bravado draining from their faces. One of them tried to laugh, a dry sound, but it died quickly. Another made a move, just a step, and Johnson's men were on them, fast and silent. Within minutes, the attackers were shoved back into the shadows, their threats and anger dissolving into the concrete and night. Sarah watched as they fled defeated, their plans ruined like dry paper in a storm. Her legs wobbled, and Johnson crossed the alley in 2 long strides. He reached out and lifted her chin with one hand, his fingers gentle but firm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, but his voice held an undercurrent of something else, fear, anger, and fierce protectiveness. She stared into his eyes, those stormy, dangerous eyes, and felt the world steady. "No," she whispered, though her voice was small. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from what she felt in that second. He lowered his hand and then, without thinking, gathered her into his arms. She felt the weight of him, the solid strength that had become her shelter. His chest rose and fell against her, steady and sure. The market sellers who had seen the end of the scene trembled with relief and fear. Whispers trailed behind them like ghosts. Johnson saved her. Johnson saved her. But Sarah did not listen to the murmurs. She listened only to the beating of his heart and the soft thump of her own. For a moment, the world outside the alley did not exist. There was only this. Safety wrapped tightly around her. When he set her down, Johnson's hands lingered a moment longer, reluctant to release her. "You should not go out alone," he said softly, the command hiding a plea. She nodded, the weight of gratitude and fear and strange new love pressing heavy in her chest. "Thank you," she breathed, the words feeling too small for what she wanted to say. He lifted the basket and tucked it under his arm, walking with her toward the mansion as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On the way back, she watched him move, silent, watchful, every step deliberate. She understood with a painful clarity how much she mattered to him now, how his life had slices of light and shadow because of her. That night, Sarah lay awake in her room. Her fear had not disappeared, but it had softened into something like courage. She remembered his promise, "I'll burn your world," and it settled into her like a strange, sweet warmth. She had once thought being loved by a man like Johnson was impossible. Now she knew love smelled of danger and rescue and a fierce, quiet devotion. The morning light broke softly over the mansion's stone walls, brushing gold across its tall windows. Sarah stood by the staircase, nervously clutching the edges of her apron. Her heart had not stopped racing since the night before. The night Johnson had come for her, the night his anger had turned into protection. Everything between them had changed, though neither of them had spoken about it. Still, she could feel it, the silent bond that now tied their hearts in a way that no words could name. She was arranging the flowers in the main hall when she heard the heavy footsteps approaching. Johnson appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in a black suit that caught the light like midnight silk. His presence filled the space, commanding and quiet, the way thunder fills a silent sky before the storm. But this morning, something in his gaze was different, softer, searching. "Sarah," he said, his voice deep but calm. "Yes, Mr. Johnson," she replied automatically. He smiled faintly, almost teasing. "Didn't I ask you to stop calling me that?" Her cheeks flushed. "Sorry, Johnson." He took a slow breath, then extended his hand. "Walk with me." Her eyes widened. Walk with you?" He nodded once. "Yes. There's no reason to hide anymore." Her heart thudded. Every part of her screamed to say no, people will talk, they'll judge, but the warmth in his eyes silenced every doubt. So, She placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers, steady and sure. When they stepped outside into the courtyard, dozens of his men were already there, guards, drivers, and staff waiting for orders. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned. No one had ever seen a woman walk beside Johnson before. And yet there she was, Sarah, the quiet maid, walking beside him, not behind him. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and Johnson reached out instinctively, brushing it back with a tenderness that stunned everyone watching. He opened the car door for her, his movement slow and deliberate, almost protective. The men exchanged stunned glances.
Is she?
One whispered.
She can't be just the maid, another muttered under his breath.
The rumors started in hushed tones, like sparks catching dry grass. But Johnson didn't seem to notice or care. He walked with the calm confidence of a man who feared nothing, his gaze fixed on Sarah as if the rest of the world no longer existed. When she sat inside the car, he leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear.
"They can talk all they want," he said softly, "but only you know who I am inside."
Sarah's throat tightened. In that moment, it wasn't the power, the money, or the danger that defined him. It was the man behind all of it. The one who had finally found peace in her presence. Her eyes shimmered as she whispered,
"I don't care what they think."
His lips curved into a faint smile, small, but enough to melt the coldness the world had built around him. As the car rolled through the city streets, people turned to stare. Shopkeepers paused mid-sentence, and waiters froze with trays in their hands. The sight of Johnson, the ruthless Mafia boss, walking with a young woman who smiled at him as though he were ordinary, as though he were good, spread through the city like wildfire. Whispers trailed them everywhere they went. "She isn't just his maid. No one's ever seen him look at anyone like that." Maybe she's the reason he's changed. Inside the car, Sarah watched the city pass by in silence. She could feel the weight of every eye, every rumor, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the warmth of his hand resting close to hers, the quiet strength in his presence, and the truth behind his words. For her, that moment, his small public act of love, was worth more than anything she had ever known. Because for the first time, the whole city might see him as something more than a monster. But she already knew the truth. Behind the armor, behind the danger, Johnson had a heart that beat only for her. The sky that evening was painted in strokes of gold and rose, the kind of sunset that made even the coldest hearts feel warm for a moment. Sarah stood by the window watching the colors melt into the horizon. The garden below looked peaceful, flowers swaying, the fountain whispering softly. Then she heard his voice from behind, "Sarah." She turned, startled. Johnson stood at the doorway. No suit jacket this time, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. The light from the setting sun brushed his face, softening his usual sharpness. His tone was quiet, almost unsure, something she rarely heard from him. "Come with me," he said. He led her through the hallway and out into the garden. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of roses and earth. They walked without speaking for a while. The sound of his footsteps beside hers was steady, grounding. Finally, they stopped near the old oak tree, the one she always used to sit under during her breaks. The same tree where weeks ago she had cried alone, thinking she'd never belong anywhere. Johnson turned to her slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those deep, guarded eyes, looked different tonight. Softer, open. He took a deep breath. "You've healed a man everyone thought was beyond saving," he said quietly. Sarah blinked, unsure how to respond. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did." His voice was firm now, sincere. "You saw light in a man who had only ever known darkness." Her heart fluttered. "You're not a bad man, Johnson. You just needed someone to remind you of that." For a moment, he looked down, almost like a boy afraid to meet her gaze. Then slowly he reached for her hands. His touch was gentle, careful, as if she were something fragile, something precious. "I don't want to hide anymore," he whispered. She frowned slightly, confused. "Hide? What do you mean?" He looked into her eyes, steady, unblinking.
I've spent years hiding my heart behind walls, but with you, those walls fell before I even realized it. Her breath caught. Johnson! Not my feelings, he continued softly, and not you. I don't want to hide either of them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The world around them seemed to fade. The rustle of the trees, the song of the crickets, the sound of the fountain, all melted into silence. "Then what are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. Johnson stepped closer, so close she could feel his breath, smell the faint hint of his cologne, warm, familiar, comforting. He smiled, an honest, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "I'm saying—" He paused, his voice breaking just a little. "I love you, Sarah." The words hung in the air, trembling between them like something sacred. For a heartbeat she couldn't move, couldn't speak. The man the whole city feared, the one who never bowed to anyone, was standing before her, confessing like a boy in love for the first time. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. You love me?" she whispered. He nodded, his thumb brushing her cheek gently. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. The golden light wrapped around them like a soft blanket, and she smiled through her tears. Without thinking, she took a small step closer and whispered, "Then stop calling it hiding and start calling it living." Johnson's eyes glistened. He cupped her face in his hands and leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. No words, no promises, just silence, deep, real, and full of emotion. That was the moment the walls between them finally vanished. The man who once ruled through fear had surrendered completely to love. And Sarah, the girl who once felt invisible, now held the heart of the most powerful man in the city. The sunset faded into night, but for them it was the beginning of a light that would never dim. The seasons changed quietly, like the world itself had begun to heal. Winter melted into spring, and the mansion that was once wrapped in silence began to breathe again. The cold marble floors now echoed with laughter. Fresh flowers filled the hallways that used to smell only of expensive cigars and loneliness. Sarah was no longer the quiet maid who used to keep her eyes down. Now she walked beside Johnson, confident, calm, and loved. Everyone in the mansion noticed the change. The once feared man who used to bark orders now smiled, asked about their families, and even shared dinner with his staff. The guards at the gates still couldn't believe it. The man who never let anyone near his heart was now gentle. He had become the kind of leader who inspired, not terrified. And the reason was simple: Sarah. She had touched something deep inside him. Not with power, not with beauty, but with kindness. She had shown him what respect, compassion, and humanity truly meant. Her patience had become his lesson. Her heart had become his home. Every morning he made sure she had breakfast before work. Every evening she would wait in his office, reading while he finished his files. Sometimes he'd look up just to watch her, how the soft lamplight touched her hair, how peace followed her wherever she went. One night the city lights shimmered beyond their balcony. Sarah stood there, wrapped in a shawl, looking at the skyline. Johnson came up behind her and placed his arms around her shoulders. "Do you remember the first day I met you?" he asked softly. She smiled. "How could I forget? You scared me half to death." He chuckled, a sound that used to be rare but now came easily. "I didn't know how to talk to people then," he admitted. "I thought power was everything. That respect came from fear." She turned to face him, her eyes warm and wet with tears. "And now?" she asked gently. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch filled with tenderness. "Now," he whispered, "I know power means nothing if your heart is empty. You taught me that." Her breath trembled. He pulled her closer, resting his chin against her hair. "I thought power made me strong," he murmured, voice breaking. "But you made me human." Sarah's tears slipped down, glistening like pearls in the soft light. She wrapped her arms around him, her voice barely a whisper. "And love," she said, "made you free." He closed his eyes and held her tighter, feeling something he hadn't felt in decades: peace. The mansion around them, once a fortress of arrogance and fear, had turned into a home filled with warmth and life. The servants who once avoided his gaze now smiled openly when they saw them together.
Children from the nearby orphanage came every weekend to play in the garden. Johnson himself built a new school in the town, a place where no child would ever feel small, unwanted, or forgotten, the way he once had. Sarah's influence had gone far beyond love. It had rebuilt humanity inside him. And soon, people began to whisper a new story about the millionaire. They no longer called him the monster of the city. They called him the man who changed because of love. He treated his workers as equals. He donated to shelters. He spoke kindly to those who once feared to look at him. He learned that greatness wasn't about owning the world, it was about healing it. And at night, when the city fell silent, he often looked at Sarah and whispered words only she could hear. "Thank you for teaching me how to live." She would smile through tears, resting her head on his chest. The heartbeat that once belonged to a man of steel now beat with softness, warmth, and gratitude. The world around them hadn't changed overnight, but one heart had. And sometimes that's all it takes to begin healing a nation. No power, no wealth, no success can ever be greater than the strength of kindness. Love can soften even the hardest hearts, and compassion can turn even the coldest places warm again. Because when you choose love over pride, forgiveness over hate, you don't just save a person. You save humanity itself.